So people actually dream throughout the night. I don't know if you've ever noticed what kind of dreaming you're doing, but usually right after you fall asleep, you have realistic dreams. This is when you're in non-REM sleep. They tend to be more vivid imagery. This is one of the reasons why PTSD is so debilitating for individuals that suffer from PTSD, because right as soon as they go to sleep, they start having dreams about their military experiences. A lot of people dream about being afraid, which is one of the great fears of military people, is that they will not be able to function. I've had dreams. I had dreams one time where I was being chased through the jungle by the Viet Cong. And so I'm hiding behind this log, and all of a sudden I pop up. They're coming at me, and I pop up and I pull off 2 rounds, and the bullets just drip out the end of my gun. You know, just like, I don't know, like it wasn't a gun at all. Anyway, and they're laughing at me. That was the bad part. Well, I don't know if that's the bad part. The bad part was that I thought I had him dead to rights. Of course, I was scared to death. So I was being chased by 2 people with AK-47s.
That's what they did.
I hope you've never had that dream before. It's god awful.
No, I've never been chased. Mine is the one to Hungary, and when I had no eyes, doing a raid, it's probably like 2, 3 in the morning, because we can catch them by surprise.
Sure.
I mean, they wake up early to pray,
Right.
but that's usually like when the sun comes up.
Right.
But there's a raid, and my MVGs were inoperable. So
This is a dream or this is real?
no, this has happened, but I'm dreaming
shit.
around it, and it's always I was dreaming about stuff that's just already happened.
Yeah.
So that's why my fingers jacked up from suppressing fire with the 50.
Oh, really?
And the 50, I was firing so much that the barrel is bright orange.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
Did it warped it and you had to change it out?
Yeah, but I didn't have time.
Yeah, of course not. Wow.
Coming out like a freaking cockroach. I was shooting at the moves. I'm like,
Yeah. It's da-da-da, 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 da-da-da.
it was like, I was like,
Well, that's what you're
freaking
supposed to, that's what you're supposed to.
Yeah, it's supposed to be 3 to 5, but I was
Yeah. Individuals who are depressed tend to have more dreams that are more intense than normal, and this is one of the reasons. Is that a pill? No, it's not a pill. Okay. That's one of the reasons that depressed people stay depressed, because they have these horrible, horrible dreams. It is thought that the excess dreaming is due to a state of hyperarousal from excess worrying, and of course that's part of the problem with being depressed.
How about if you dream about homework?
I'm sorry?
Dream about homework.
You dream about homework?
Not in that way. It's just, the way you're just like, okay, I have to get this done, get
I
this
think you're
done.
just stressed, bro.
Oh, I do have a lot of things going on. I'm good.
You have a lot of anxiety?
No, I'm fine. I'm fine. It's just, I'm just trying to organize everything.
I keep having dreams where I've forgotten an article of clothing. Sometimes it's my pants. It was my shirt one time. And I'm running around looking for a pair of pants. So I go to my office and I can't find my office. And then I can't find my classroom. And I always leave my office about 5 or 10 minutes early so I can walk over here. Well, I leave about 15 minutes early so I can find my pants. and I
So you're
can't.
walking around.
I'm walking around, I can't find my pants, so I'm afraid, I'm just deathly afraid I'm gonna be late for class. And I'm walking around and I can't, and everything's changed. The campus isn't the same, and it's not this campus. I mean, it's weird. And I'll end up on the top of a building, looking out and going, where's my office?
Yeah.
Where's my class? Oh, it's a horrible, horrible dream. It's kind of funny though.
I know that's how I think about it. I think it's funny. I was like, why am I dreaming about my homework?
Why am I dreaming about forgetting an article of clothing? As you get older, of course, sometimes you do actually forget things from time to time.
Yeah.
Not usually your pants, but it's,
Oh.
it's kind of
Do you think that's what it is though? It's like the fear of like you're missing something?
Well, it's just the fear of missing something. I don't know if you've ever walked outside and forgot to zip your pants up. You know, that kind of stuff happens from time to time.
Oh, yeah, Tank's been out of the armor before, yeah.
It's not, that's all. And of course, every time it happens to me, I'm going, oh my God, I must be getting old. Anyway. So night terrors, there's a difference between night terrors and nightmares. Night terrors occur at the beginning of a sleep cycle. Usually right after the person goes to sleep. They're in stage 3 or 4 sleep. It's more prevalent among males than it is among females. Gets a little strange here. It tends to be more common in children than it is in adults. It's almost impossible to wake somebody up from night terrors. I told you the story of the young lady who cold-cocked the boxing champion. She thought he was some kind of a monster. And they sent her off to a mental hospital because of it. She didn't come back until she was a freshman in high school. I know, it was really kind of a crazy situation. But she cold-cocked this guy that was a heavyweight boxing champion in Montana. And that's one of the reasons that they did it. They thought that she was mad at him or that he was attacking her. So they got her out of the house. It was an excuse to get her out of the house. He didn't want her to leave. She was his stepdaughter. He didn't want her to leave, and she didn't want to leave, but it was people misinterpreting what was going on. And she had no idea why she did it. She didn't even know she did it.
She wasn't even.
No, she was having a nightmare. She was having a night terror, actually, is what she was having. And she didn't realize this until later on, until she was in my class, and we were talking about night terrors, and, you know, a light bulb went off over her head, and she realized what had happened. So night terrors happen more to males than females. Nightmares happen just before you wake up. They're usually when you're in REM sleep. And because of this, of course, the dreams are more intense, and you can wake up from them. This may have happened to you. You're having a nightmare, and all of a sudden you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning. You can't go back to sleep. So that's very common for this to happen. It usually happens to more females than males, as weird as that is. Night terrors happen to boys, and nightmares tend to happen to girls. So what do the girls dream about? What are their nightmares about? Their nightmares tend to be about sexual intercourse, about rape, as weird as that may seem, which I guess is kind of logical. Males very rarely dream about being raped, but females dream about it all the time. Sexual assault, that kind of thing, as horrible as that seems. Humans of different ages sleep differently. Most infants, they don't have a stable sleep pattern for a couple of weeks, sometimes for months after they're born. And this is one of the reasons, and because their sleep pattern is so erratic, this is one of the reasons why it's so difficult to deal with a newborn baby. It's okay for nurses, of course, they're awake all the time anyway, you have shift work and whatnot. This is one of the reasons why in the old days, families would have somebody come in, an aunt or maybe the grandmother would come in and help take care of the baby for the first couple months because the baby had such an erratic sleep cycle, which makes sense. Unfortunately, of course, in the United States, we've gotten away from this, and people don't, Jill has a baby, but nobody goes to help her take care of the baby for the first couple of weeks. So she becomes sleep deprived. She starts getting depressed, postpartum depression. And that may be one of the reasons why postpartum depression is so prevalent.
What exactly is it, like, postpartum depression?
Postpartum depression has to do with a couple different things. One, it has to do with the fact that everything is erratic. The sleep patterns of the baby is erratic, so you can't sleep. You can't sleep at night because the baby's awake. The other part has to do with hormones, a change of hormones. While a woman is pregnant, she's got this huge surge of progesterone, and her cheeks are all rosy, and she's just giddy all the time. She's also got oxytocin that's splashing through her system. So she does really weird things like she redecorates the house. She cleans everything. It's called nesting. And we see this, of course, in lower animals, but we also see it in humans. They'll create a more positive atmosphere in their house. So all of this is going on while she's pregnant. As soon as she has the baby, in order for her to go back to normal, her progesterone crashes, and she has a surge of estrogen, trying to put her uterus back into the right position so that she can have another baby, in essence. So we've got all this hormonal change, all these hormonal changes are taking place. Whereas she was one person before she had the baby with all this progesterone splashing through her system. Now she's got a depletion of progesterone, and it can cause her to have emotional reactions to what's going on. So she cries a lot.
I've heard that like some women actually have like thoughts of like hurting their babies or something.
Right, that's postpartum psychosis.
Isn't that what what's her name had in our next class?
In the next class.
I forgot her name. Remember I did a counseling session with her after class?
Oh, I don't know. I haven't talked
Oh, that's
about
what I thought she had, because...
Oh, her character?
Yeah.
You mean? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure.
No, not in real life.
I don't-
But
Well, I mean, it gets that bad.
It gets that bad, sure, yeah. Sometimes women get so bad that they drift into permanent psychosis, where they have to be hospitalized for the rest
They
of their
never come
lives.
back?
No. It happens. It's relatively rare. It's more likely to have postpartum depression or postpartum neuroses.
How long does the depression last?
Until their hormones regulate themselves. Sometimes 2 or 3 months. In England, if a woman murders her child, infanticide, if she murders her child within the first 18 months of the baby's life, they can't charge her for murder because it's considered postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis.
Their system is weird. All the guys wear the wigs in the freaking court.
I mean, everybody wore wigs back in the 18th century. So
Yeah,
that's
they still do.
But they still do. Well, it's a little strange. But they believe that postpartum psychosis is very likely and very possible. So if a woman does something like that, and of course the English are a lot different than we are. The English never, ever send somebody to help somebody take care of a baby. I mean, it just never happens. So they're more isolated. So it's much more common for something to happen in England than in the United States. So they changed their laws to fit it.
That's crazy.
Yeah, but it does happen, and so if you've been around women that were pregnant, well, I guess you were probably deployed when you're.
I left when my son was 10 days old. So I mean, just say you got 10 days and then you're going to.
Yeah, so you missed the whole party, the whole negative party. Was there somebody there to help your wife?
My ex, her dad owned the house right next door.
Oh, okay.
So her mom was
Oh,
there.
so there were people around, and that probably helped it a lot. The fact that there was somebody around that she could call on if she got tired, and of course everybody loves babies. Everybody loves babies. They're so much fun to take care of. So if you had been around when she was right after the baby was born, you would have seen her mood changing, from minute to minute.
But she really, I had 2 stepkids also, so I think it was just, I know her hormones were real strong, you know what I mean? But
Right.
That's it, I don't really know.
Yeah, and
I was in the stand.
But it really doesn't make any difference how many children you have. You can have different reactions with different children. Sometimes the first one's the hardest one, sometimes, it's the last one that's the hardest one. Usually it's going to be the last one because they go into such severe depression. And this can last, a year, can last a year and a half. It all depends on how much support they get from, not especially from their spouse. It usually has to do with their extended family, how much support they can get from their extended family as to what their reaction will be. So you're kind of lucky that you live in an environment where there is so much extended family. That this is probably fairly alien to people on the reservation because there's so many people around to help them take care of the baby. And that's the hardest part, is the erratic sleep pattern that the baby has. But eventually, of course, everything will come out okay. I have 2 children, and when my daughter was born, she went into a sleep pattern like almost instantaneously. So she slept 8 hours through the night. We didn't have to worry about anything. My son, he never did. He never developed a sleep pattern, and it really irritated my wife, and that's maybe one of the reasons why she left. Let's pretend that's one of the reasons why she left. And she was breastfeeding him, and so that was tough because she wouldn't get up at night to feed him, and here he's just crying, he's starving to death because he hasn't eaten for 15 minutes, so he's pissed. And sometimes I just get up and I try to take care of him, but I can't feed him. So she'd be asleep, and I'd just kind of attach the baby to her breast, and until he went to sleep, then I'd take him, put him back to bed. She never woke up. She had no idea. Maybe that's part of the reason why we had a problem. Premature infants may spend as much as 80% of their sleep in REM sleep. Now remember, REM sleep is not restful. And they're spending 80% of their sleep pattern in REM sleep. Full-term infants, about 50% REM. So they're actually aware of what's going on in REM. REM sleep declines as people age, but it accounts for about 20% of the sleep in an average adult. So the 3 of us probably get about 80% of our sleep is fairly restful sleep, and 20% is REM. Sleep deprivation, studies have been conducted on subjects, and it was demonstrated that after a prolonged period of time, the individual shows signs of hallucinations, irritability, difficulty in concentration, and disorientation. And this has to do with the fact that you're not drifting down into delta wave sleep, and since you don't have all that repairing going on, it creates a havoc in your brain. These symptoms seem more pronounced in morning and nearly absent in the late afternoon and early evening. In the morning, before 8 o'clock is what we're talking about when we're talking about the morning. One of the things that happens to you as a human, you will have a cortisol surge. Cortisol is is the stress hormone. We all have stress hormones that are activated at select times during the day. So whether you are awake or whether you care or what, no matter what's going on in your life, about 8 o'clock in the morning you'll have a surge of cortisol, and that wakes you up, makes you completely awake and ready to tackle the rest of the day. And the other surge you get is about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So because you have that cortisol surge at 8 o'clock in the morning, you're fairly functional throughout the morning. You're okay until the afternoon. Why in the world would you have a cortisol surge at 4 o'clock in the afternoon? What anthropologically has happened to us that we needed a surge of cortisol at 8 o'clock in the morning to wake up, and at 4 o'clock, but why at 4 o'clock in the afternoon? What does 4 o'clock in the afternoon have to do with anything?
An hour before you get off work.
I'm sorry?
An hour before you get off work.
Yeah, but I mean, if we're talking about anthropologically, what's happening at 4 o'clock in the afternoon what is so important about 4 o'clock in the afternoon? Why would we need this surge of stress hormone at 4 o'clock in the afternoon? Yeah, we're about to get off work and we're going to go home and play with the kids. Why at 4 o'clock in the afternoon? Snickers even used to have a commercial where they talked about everybody crashing at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So they needed a Snickers at 2 or 3 to get to 4 o'clock, as weird as that is. Dr. Pepper used to have an advertisement, this is from the 1920s, 10, 2, and 4. You're supposed to drink a Dr. Pepper at 10 o'clock in the morning, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, that's kind of weird times. Why 4 hours, then 2 hours? Why is there 4 hours in the morning and between your Dr. Peppers and two hours between in the afternoon? What happens in the afternoon to our to our ancestors? What the hell was going on at 4 o'clock in the afternoon? I mean, 8 o'clock in the morning makes a lot of sense. You got to move your camp. You've got to hunt and find your food. That makes sense for in the morning. But what's happening at 4 o'clock in the afternoon? At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you better be finding someplace else to camp, someplace secure. So you have this surge of energy in order to secure yourself for the night so that you don't get attacked by some nocturnal predator. As weird as that sounds, this is what we've determined. This is what evolutionary psychology has determined, or evolutionary biology. So we need these surges in order to survive. Sleep recovery. After you lose sleep, and this happens to some people on a relatively frequent basis, if you're a night owl or if you're one of those guys that parties on the weekends and stays up for 48 straight hours, what happens the next night? Well, usually you sleep pretty good the next night. The reason you sleep good is because you're spending a lot more hours and a lot more time in stage 4 sleep. One of the things that happens in stage 4 sleep is that you have an increase of serotonin. Serotonin is that substance. That's one of the reasons why you get so depressed or you have such erratic behavior if you try to stay up for an extended length of time. It's because you don't have enough serotonin in your system and you're feeling just a little bit dull. Now the interesting thing is the first night that you try to recover from staying awake, of course you go into stage 4 sleep and you increase your serotonin level, but sometimes you can get serotonin. It's not really poisoning. It's you get too much serotonin, and too much serotonin makes you feel kind of just vaguely nauseous, kind of dull, kind of thick-headed, as weird as that is. My son used to do this because he was a bartender. He was a bartender, and he would spend, he'd be on 2 nights, and then he'd be off for 3, and then he'd be on for 3 nights, and then be off for 2, that kind of thing. So he had a really difficult time with his sleep pattern, because when you work in the bar, this is in Los Angeles, when you work in the bar closes at 4 o'clock in the morning, or closes at 6 o'clock in the morning, then you have to spend 2 hours cleaning the place up.
Close at 2.
I'm sorry?
State law, close at 2.
2 o'clock? Well, he never came up.
Stop serving at 2, by the time they clean up.
Yeah, it takes a couple hours to clean up. Anyway, so he would get home and he was pretty tired, and then he would go to bed, and he wouldn't get up until the afternoon. And sometimes he'd have a soccer game or something, and he'd have to go play, and he'd just feel thick. He said, I can't think, my head is full of mush, that kind of stuff. Anyway, it's because of the serotonin. So the first night you go into stage 4 sleep. The second night, you'll go into REM sleep for longer. And of course, REM sleep is when you have those amazing dreams. So the first night you will actually do most of your recovering, and the next night you'll go into REM. Now, if we can keep the person out of REM sleep, we can make them go insane, because this has something to do with psychological recovery. So they really need to go into REM sleep in order to recover completely. This basal forebrain in the back portion of the frontal cortex in front of the hypothalamus is crucial for shortwave sleep. Neurons in the area are activated by sleep. Sleep is still kind of a mystery to a lot of people, or to scientists. Mainly because there's 3 of us in this room, we all have different sleep patterns. And potentially we're putting off different neurotransmitters. We're utilizing different neurotransmitters. For one thing, I'm really old, and you guys are relatively young, so our sleep patterns aren't going to be the same. Some of it may be genetic. I have different DNA than you guys have. A little bit different DNA. You're from this part of the world. You're Scott's from San Diego, and Earlson's from northern Arizona, and I'm from Indiana, which is way up near the Great Lakes. So we have we grew up different. We grew up in different environments. Right now in my hometown, it's like minus 40 degrees.
I'm from this probably, you see, it's about 8:30 over there.
What time is it? What time is it here? It's 9:30.
9:30.
9:30. Yeah, it's 9:30. So it's 11:30.
No, it's 8:30 in California.
It's 8:30 in California. It's 11:30.
It's probably about a good 50.
Yeah, probably 50 degrees, and it's minus 40 in Muncie. So yeah, I mean, we grew up differently. So potentially our genetics are different. In the wintertime, people up north, because it's darker up there, they sleep longer periods of time. They sleep for 8 or 10 hours a night in the wintertime because it's so dark. It gets dark. It gets dark here at 5 o'clock, and we're this far south. You can imagine it's getting dark around 4. It starts to get dark around 4. The sun goes down about 4 o'clock. So what time do you go to bed? You go to bed, what, 3 or 4 hours after the sun goes down? Well, that's still 7 or 8 o'clock. Unless you... Anyway, so genetically, depending on where you're from, and genetically, all of these things may change your sleep pattern. So we don't have the same sleep patterns, and you can't really. We try to figure out what sleep apnea is. We try to figure out why people have insomnia, what's going on here, and of course, what we discover is that nobody has the same sleep pattern. The basal forebrain and the back portion of the frontal cortex and the front of the hypothalamus is crucial for shortwave sleep. Neurons in the area are activated by sleep and use GABA as the neurotransmitter to inhibit the areas of the brain. Norepinephrine, strangely enough, inhibits this area. So norepinephrine, which usually excites you in the back of the of your frontal cortex, it actually inhibits this area. So it actually puts you to sleep. So the better you feel about yourself, the more likely you're going to fall asleep. So if you feel okay about yourself, probably you'll have a pretty good sleep pattern. You won't have to worry about it. If you feel good about yourself. If you feel bad about yourself and you don't have that much norepinephrine splashing through your system, potentially what will happen is you will start getting insomnia, as weird as that sounds.
Is that why veterans can't really sleep?
I'm sorry?
Yeah, they feel guilty and stuff. Is that why veterans can't sleep?
Let me tell you a quick story about my wife. My wife was a colonel in the Air Force. Spent 24 years in the service. And she used to sleep without any problems at all when she was in the service. And she was responsible for hospitals, and she was responsible for orders about war. This is before 2001. But she was responsible for just a lot of stuff, and that lady used to sleep really good. She could lay down on a pillow and fall right to sleep. As soon as she got out of the service, as soon as she was no longer a colonel, well, she was a retired colonel, as soon as she was no longer had that responsibility, she developed insomnia. This happens to a lot of veterans. One day you have the world's fate under your thumb, and the next day you get no responsibilities whatsoever. And because of that, a lot of times, and it has to do with norepinephrine. It has to do with this neurotransmitter right here. So one day you're important and the next day you're not. And as soon as you're not important anymore, you don't have the norepinephrine splashing through your system, and now it's harder for you to fall asleep. And that's what happened to my wife. And this has been going on since 2001. She retired in 2001. And she developed all kinds of interesting sleep problems. She started having physical problems. She was in that Bradley vehicle accident where she hit her neck and she hit her hips. She's had her neck fused. She's had both of her hips replaced. She's had carpal tunnel surgery.
She's bionic, huh?
She is now. Before she was out of the service, I mean, this happened in 94. She had the accident in 94. And she didn't have any problems with anything until 2000, until she retired.
In 94, so she was Desert Storm?
She was in, she was in Korea. She was in Korea.
Oh, Korea.
Korea in 94. And there was a dust up between the Americans and the Koreans in 93. She got there right in the middle of it. And so they were deploying and they were practicing doing things and whatnot. I mean, there was never actually much of a shooting war going on, but there was stuff going on. There was a lot of movement going on. We were trying to show the North Koreans that, you can't do that to us. You're not going to do that to us. And she was at a Air Force base. She was at Kunsan, which is south of Seoul. Seoul's right up near the DMZ.
I don't know, I just heard of Casey.
There's a lot of crazy stuff going on. Anyway, as soon as she got out of service, she started having sleep problems. And then all of a sudden, all of these other problems occurred. And now she's got sleep apnea, so she has to wear the mask. And it's quite attractive, that funky mask.
Yeah, I have to sleep on my side.
She can't sleep on her side because of her hips. She can't sleep flat on her side.
I have it. I mean, I've gained a lot of weight, but I don't know, it's just weird.
Yeah.
Like I'll actually stop breathing, like it freaks Corey out sometimes.
That's sleep apnea. It used to freak me out too. She had the worst, she snored like a train coming down the track. I mean, it was pretty bad. Anyway, so this is the reason why veterans have problems. One day you've got all the power in the world and right under your thumb, and the next day you got no power whatsoever. So your self-esteem suffers.
It could be other factors, like me, I have survivor guilt,
Sure.
you know?
Yeah.
So pretty much anything that makes you
Right.
happy,
Exactly.
guilty, then
Exactly. So this is all the reasons why it's so difficult to figure out why one individual or the other has why we can't understand people's sleep patterns. Everybody's is different. It may be different from one day to the next. The pons signals the brain to begin REM sleep. It is GABA and glycine in the pons that inhibits the motor neurons from reaching their action potential in the spinal column. Because of this, during REM sleep, the sleeper's muscles aren't just relaxed. It's not like you're just relaxed, they're paralyzed. They're completely flaccid. You can't do anything. And this is one of the reasons why, if you've ever had the dream where you needed to do something, you needed to do it right now, and you tried to do it, you couldn't, you were paralyzed, you couldn't move. It's just freaky. It's really kind of strange. You don't have any muscle tone whatsoever. Reticular formation is a collection of systems whose activity creates, well, let me show you what it looks like. This is the reticular activating system, the RAS. It's right here, and you can see it goes way down into your spinal column and right into the middle of your brain. This is the reticular activating system. This is what gets you up if an emergency occurs. If the baby starts crying, you wake up right away and you go, before you're completely awake, you're halfway down the hallway trying to take care of the baby. That's the reticular activating system. Let me go back to where I was. Activation produces heightened awareness and arousal. Damage produces comatose conditions, so if you ever damage this area of your body, you won't wake up again. You'll be comatose until the swelling goes down or until the damage is repaired. And usually it has to do with swelling. The brain tries to protect itself by swelling in the area. All the cells of our body, if I punch myself in the arm and the forearm, my arm will swell up to some extent. And that's because that's how we protect ourselves, by flooding the area with fluid. So if you sprain your ankle all of a sudden just balloons up, or your knee is suddenly just huge. And the reason is because of the edema. This is how we protect ourselves. So the same thing happens in your brain. You get a blow to the head. This is why a concussion can cause problems. When you get a blow to the head, then all those neurons around those neurons, everything swells up. Fluid fills the area to protect it, to keep it from there being any more damage, as little damage as possible. So we've got all this edema taking place. So a lot of times what will happen, somebody will be in an automobile accident, they'll have a blow to the head, and they'll be in a coma. And so what we have to do is wait for that swelling to go down before we can do anything. What happened to me? Oh, I fell out of a helicopter. I landed on my shoulders, but I hit the back of my head. And the next thing I knew, I was like 6,000 miles. They transported me back home. I wasn't even in country anymore.
I thought you were back in the States. Or?
I was back in the States and I had no idea where I was.
Yeah, same thing when I was launched to pull the IV out, started walking down the hall.
You didn't even know where you were. You thought you were back in Iraq.
I thought I was in Balad.
Okay, yeah.
Iraq, that's where like most of the hospitals are at and stuff. And I thought it was a bullet.
Exactly. The last thing I knew, I was tumbling through I was doing somersaults in the air, trying to land on my back, is what I was trying to do. I didn't want to land on my face. And that's the last thing I remember. The next thing I remembered, next thing that happened to me, I was at Wright Pat Air Force Base in the hospital. How the hell I got there, you know, they had to transport me all the way across the ocean. They had to transport me from California to Ohio, Dayton, Ohio, and that's the first thing I remember is waking up in the hospital bed. And my wife was there. And she had this really funny look on her face. I think she was upset that I lived. If I had died, she would have gotten $35,000. I think she actually did spend some of it.
Dang, 35? That's how much your
That's how much our insurance.
Now, for the last one I signed was $400,000.
$35,000. You know how much money we were getting? How much, what our pay was?
Well, inflation was, I don't know.
Let's not even talk about inflation. You guys were making off like bandits. We were getting ripped off by bandits. Most.
You guys had BAH back then?
I'm sorry?
BAS and BAA?
Yeah, we made a lot more money from that kind of stuff.
Well, officers, yeah.
Yeah. I wasn't an officer. I had one stripe, I think. I had two stripes. Different components of the reticular formation use different neurotransmitters. The locus ceruleus uses norepinephrine. Locus ceruleus is really kind of interesting. This is the area that they think is affected if you have ADHD or ADD. The raphe nuclei uses serotonin. That's where serotonin is produced. Activity changes excitability of the cortical neurons. Neurons are more active, more responsive to inputs. And that's what the reticular activating system looks like. Why in the world do we go to sleep? Biologically, we need to do this. It conserves our energy. Other animals will hibernate. They'll go to sleep in the cold when it's cold, so that they don't burn so much energy. Squirrels do this. Bears do this, of course. Sleep allows animals to be inactive when their major predators are active, and that's the way that humans are. We sleep during the night and we are awake during the day. That's when we forage. Most large cats are nocturnal hunters. Some of them are. Lions aren't. But panthers and jaguars and whatnot, those are all nighttime hunters. Sleep restores the body, of course. We need to repair ourselves. Sleep aids memory consolidation. So if you don't go to sleep, a lot of times whatever you learn during that period of wakefulness will be lost. Sleep consolidates material learned while awake, and those are the reasons why we sleep. Somnambulism is another name for sleepwalking. It takes place in stage 3 or 4 sleep, and that way we're not paralyzed and we can actually move. Sleepwalking and sleep talking. The night that I was stabbed by my wife, evidently I'd been talking in my sleep, and that's what she was irritated about. That and the fact that I went to sleep while she was talking to me, while she was yelling at me. We were having a fight. We were having an argument. And I went to sleep, and the next thing I know, I woke up with a knife in my chest, which was a bit of a surprise, as you can imagine. Anyway, that was a lot of fun. Sleepwalking, I have an older brother, and one night, it was like 2 or 3 in the morning, it was a full moon night, just like last night. But of course, this is during the summertime. Well, it's in the early spring, late spring, I guess, April or May. And the flowers were out, the dandelions were out. And my brother went outside, and I couldn't figure out what he was doing. He woke me up. I guess I was in an REM cycle, so he woke me up. And I followed him outside, and he sat down in the middle of the yard. Well, the thing was that this is Indiana where there's a lot of humidity. There's a lot of humidity. Anyway, there was a lot of dew on the ground. I mean, it was like walking through a creek. Anyway, he sat down in the middle of the yard, and of course there were puddles of water all over the place. And here he just sat right down in the middle of the yard, and he sat there for about 15 minutes. Got up and he walked back and went back to bed. And so here I am, I follow him outside, and like an idiot, I go out in the yard with him. And of course, as I walk around, I'm getting more and more dew on my pajamas. And by the time I went inside, my pajamas were wet all the way up to my knees. I mean, I had soaked up that much water. And so here I follow him into the upstairs, and he lays down on the bed, and I reached over and I tried to find out how cold he was, because my feet were freezing. My legs were completely soaked. He was completely dry. He had been producing so much heat while he was sitting in the yard that he was completely dry. His feet were warm, and his pajamas were completely dry. And of course, I was soaked, so I had to change my pajamas in order to go back to bed. I was pissed. I was really pissed. And I don't know what the hell he was doing. He sat down and he was making, he took dandelions and he was making some kind of a loop. And so when I went out the next day, and there it was sitting right there. He had made some one of those things you put on your hip out of flowers. It was really kind of weird. And of course, he went outside, he couldn't figure out what was going on because he had been completely asleep. He was sleepwalking. Anyway, my brother, of course, he called me all kinds of an idiot because he didn't remember any of this, and if he didn't remember it, it didn't happen, of course. We used to fight all the time. There's something wrong with that guy. Anyway, that's somnambulism. Sleep-in uresis takes place in the same stages, 3 and 4. You cannot wet the bed when you're going through REM sleep because you're paralyzed. You're completely paralyzed, and that portion of your body doesn't function. Wetting the bed is a problem for some children. It's genetic. It especially happens to boys, far more than girls. One method of reducing incidence of bedwetting is a nasal spray of vasopressin. Vasopressin reduces the amount of urine that the individual accumulates. Vasopressin tells the kidneys to stop producing urine, is what it does. So if you spray this up somebody's nose, the problem is you can't use it all the time. If you try to use it all the time, what happens is it'll affect the kidneys. And then all of a sudden, you're not making as much urine as you should be making. Yeah, so it can cause a problem. So you need to use it sparingly. You can't spray this up their nose every night. If you do that, then you're gonna mess their kidneys up. Once upon a time, gastric ulcers were a really, really serious problem. There was a lot of stress going on in the world, and we had no way of controlling people's stomach acid. Now that we have Zantac and we have Prilosec, we don't worry about this stuff anymore. Not nearly as many gastric ulcers as there were in the past. Researchers have discovered that REM sleep can irritate or activate gastric ulcers. The reason is because during REM sleep, they're dreaming about things that have happened to them during the day. They're actually dreaming about their work during their sleep, so they're producing all these stomach acids, and that's the biggest problem. It's genetic. Some individuals will have, you'll have a whole family of people with ulcers.
Hey, when I was inside, they had to stick as active duty, they had to stick a camera down. I had
Did you have ulcers?
real gastritis.
Gastritis?
Well, the drinking didn't help either. I
Yeah.
drank almost fifth a day. But yeah, it was bad.
Yeah.
But like I'd be talking and someone said, "You're bleeding." I had like blood coming out of my
I'm sure the alcohol didn't help.
No, I didn't.
I was working in the hospital one night, and this guy came in with a bleeding ulcer. So we worked on him all night long. He was a staff sergeant. No, he was an Army staff sergeant, is what he was. He was an Army staff sergeant. And he was at an Air Force hospital. This was in Wright Pat, when I worked there. Anyway, so I'm cross-matching blood all night long on this guy, and they're trying to get his ulcer to stop bleeding. And just keeps vomiting it back up. Of course, we're not making him drink it, we're pumping it in his arm. But he's just throwing up all this blood. And they're making him swallow ice chips, trying to slow it down, trying to slow down his bleeding. What had happened was he was an alcoholic and he had bleeding ulcers. And the dumbest thing you can do if you have bleeding ulcers is to drink alcohol, because it opens up wounds, right? I mean, that's what you use to open up a wound, is alcohol, to clean the scab off. Anyway, so he's bleeding to death. And I emptied the blood bank. I emptied that whole blood bank. This is Wright Pat. This is a major Air Force hospital, and I emptied the blood bank, keeping him alive that night. And I was supposed to get off at like 6 o'clock in the morning, and I was still cross-matching blood. And if you're cross-matching blood, you can't hand it off to somebody else, because if there's a mistake, you can't do that. So anyway, so I was there until 10 o'clock in the morning. He finally stopped. And as soon as they found out that I'd emptied the blood bank, my God, you would have thought that I shot somebody or something. Anyway, I saved his life, okay? But we emptied the blood. What did they want me to do? The doctor was ordering blood, right?
Oh, I see, you get pretty pissed off.
It's not like I could go, I'm not gonna give you any more blood because...
You didn't get the ring for it.
Yeah. I would have been a dead duck. But the blood bank, the person who was in charge of the blood bank just had a fit. And then, of course, our lab director came in and tried to cool things down, and I'm going, what the hell did you want me to do? One of those negatives.
Was he okay?
I didn't get out there until 12 o'clock.
Was he okay though, Staff Sergeant?
Staff Sergeant lived, yeah, we saved his life. We saved his life. Finally, he, everything normalized. And so what did he do next?
Drink a buck.
He checked himself out of the hospital and went to the bar. Of course he did. Of course he did.
I'm not sure what you guys call it in the Air Force, but in the Army it's Class 6.
Class 6 store?
Yeah.
No, this is in Ohio. Ohio has, it's like the only stores that can sell alcohol in Ohio
Grocery stores? Or?
are owned by the state. They're controlled by the state.
Oh.
Yeah, and he went to one of those stores and bought himself a fifth of whiskey. The next thing, I checked him into the morgue like 3 days later. I was so pissed. I'd gotten in trouble.
All that blood, huh?
He lost all that blood. And it was in buckets all over the ICU. Of course, I had to take the blood up every time. I was working graveyard. I had to take the blood up every time. And then they'd order, 4 more units. You better cross-match 4 more units. And I did, and he used every drop of it. I know, stupid. But then again, could we have let him just bleed to death?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
No, you guys got your own hope.
Everybody got in trouble for it. Anyway, okay, so that's a bleeding ulcer. That's all the fun stuff. Sufferers of gastric ulcers secrete 3 to 20 times more acid during REM as a normal person does, and this is the reason they've got ulcers. I take Prilosec. It's not that I would have ulcers. I had acid reflux was my problem. So now I take Prilosec religiously so that I don't get any acid reflux. I've got a really weird stomach. If I drink water, It makes
Oh, yeah, you were saying.
I get more acidity.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have problems with water. Other people, if they drink anything else, it gives them a problem, but I can't drink water.
How do you stay hydrated?
I drink lemonade. I have to drink something with acid in it. If it has acid, then my stomach doesn't produce more acid. But if it's just water, then it produces all this excess acid. I can't
It doesn't
drink
get
water.
you dehydrated? I mean, there's no sugar in it, right?
There's no sugar in it, no.
That's crazy. No, I drink like 8 bottles a day.
I can't drink water at all. Cardiovascular problems. Hospitals report that cardiac patients are more likely to die during the last 2 hours of sleep, 4 to 6 o'clock a.m., the period of the most intense REM episodes. So they die when their brains are as active as they are when they're awake. And that's usually when people die. It is irritating to be working the graveyard shift because you get all the dead bodies. People die right after midnight. They'll die at 2 o'clock in the morning. They'll die at 3 o'clock in the morning. They die at 4 o'clock in the morning. So what nurses have to do, they have to prepare the body to come down to the morgue. And it takes about an hour, sometimes 2 hours. But damn it, we used to get all the dead bodies. So when I was working graveyard in the lab, I checked in all the dead bodies. It wasn't because I wanted to, it was because it was that time of the day. Everybody dies. What people will do is they'll hang on until their anniversary. They'll have an anniversary date, their birthday, their kid's birthday, their Christmas. Oh God, we used to get tons of people that would die on New Year's Day. You never want to work in the morgue on New Year's Day. You're going to get just a bucket load of people, a truckload of people at midnight on New Year's Eve. People they'll make it to their anniversary. Usually they're trying to make it till their birthday, but it's really weird. I mean, people will just hang on until they hit that anniversary date, and then they'll just die that morning.
My mom's mother, she died on Mother's Day. My mom hated Mother's Day. That's a real shitty way to go.
Well, they're holding on until the next holiday or something. I mean, people die on holidays.
Well, no, it wasn't her thing. She was going through chemo and everything, and
Okay.
it was just her time.
I'll tell you what, life and death is really kind of interesting. You probably have seen this when people will hold on, they'll fight, and then they just give up. Then they just stop. And that's what's happening with people that are laying in a bed. They'll go, I need to make it till tomorrow. I don't feel very good. Everything's slowing down.
I know a lot of my guys died pretty quick.
Yeah, well, yeah.
But I mean, I've seen from like other people, and they're just done. They'll try to pull the freaking cord themselves or something.
They'll hang on until it's time to go. It's really kind of weird to watch.
I have a question about that. So like the part of the brain where you said like they alert you, right? Well, I guess if your sleep doesn't really work for them who have died.
They're not really repairing themselves. They're so far gone that they're not really repairing themselves. So what they have to do is they have to hang on. My dad had psoriasis. He had all kinds of interesting heart problems. He lived to be 90 years old, which nobody would have predicted that he would have made it to 90. He was a World War II vet. And he and my mom had this really strange relationship. Anyway, so he's made 90 years old, and he's hanging on, and things aren't very good, and he's tired and everything. So they put him in the hospital, and he's got psoriasis so bad that his skin is tissue paper, and you can't touch it. If you touch it, it rips, and he starts bleeding. So he's in really bad shape, and so one night he says to my mom, is it okay if I go? And she said, sure, you can go. And he died like 2 minutes later. He just let go. But he was holding on, and he was holding on for her, as weird as that sounds. So he didn't want to disappoint her. As funny as all that is. Anyway, so people live until they die. It's just the way it goes. My sister had cancer, and she was dying, and she wanted to know what it felt like to die. And so she asked my mom, and my mom wouldn't tell her. My mom was a nurse. My mom wouldn't tell her, so she asked me, and I'm kind of an asshole, so I told her, it doesn't hurt. You know, it just slows down until you stop. And she was afraid that she would choke. She didn't want to choke to death. So I told her, that's not the way it works. You just kind of slow down.
Unless you get like shot in the throat or something.
Well, yeah, but that's not what was going to happen with her. She had cancer, so she was just going to die. And that's what happened. She just slowed down and then died. Eventually she died. And if you're there when somebody's, in the process of dying, things just keep getting slower and slower and slower. The breaths, the respirations. So even though the movies show their last words, it usually doesn't work that way. They usually take one more breath and then they're gone. Research also shows a connection between angina and REM. Angina has to do with chest pains. And the only reason you have chest pains is because of your heart being clogged up or something being a problem in your heart. Anyway, angina. So you usually have angina early in the morning.
The part of the brain where it says alertness and stuff,
Right.
these people don't wake up and have heart attacks. That's when some people just die in their sleep.
People don't wake up, they have chest pains, and that wakes them up and it scares them. And of course, since they're scared, now it's worse because...
No, but some people just die in their sleep.
Yeah, you could die in your sleep. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
with this, they just don't wake up.
They just don't wake up. Yeah, that's the way
the alerting part of their brain doesn't work.
Well, their heart has clogged up and now their heart stops beating. It gets into arrhythmia and then they die. Yeah, that's why that's what happened to Heath Ledger. You remember Heath Ledger? He died of a drug overdose. But everything slowed down until he stopped breathing. Insomnia is commonly reported in old farts. Did I say old farts? I meant older people. Females, users of tobacco, users of coffee, users of alcohol. And the reason is because of caffeine, of course. The alcohol has alcohol in it, and the tobacco, of course, has nicotine. And all of these things keep you awake, as weird as that sounds. So people that drink a lot, people that smoke a lot, people that drink too much coffee, they'll have reactions. Females, why in the world would females have a problem with insomnia? What's wrong with women?
They eat too much.
They eat too much? They think too much? They think too much? Probably has to do with hormones, I'm guessing. Has to do with the hormones. Sleep state misperception is when an individual claims to not have slept, and to have an EEG tracing. If we look at an EEG tracing, the individual actually does sleep. What they're doing is dreaming about staying awake.
So people that have migraines, like I do, sometimes the coffee helps, and they're screwed.
No.
It says users of coffee.
How much coffee do you drink? That's the question.
No, when I have migraines, it can happen in the day, it can happen in the night. The coffee helps.
Right. But you don't drink that much coffee.
Because I could probably, well, I don't know, it depends.
How much is a lot of coffee? And there's a difference. My dad used to drink buckets of coffee every day. And he hated decaffeinated coffee. He used to drink the hardest stuff.
Yeah, I don't see the point of that.
Exactly. And that's the way my dad was. And he was drinking coffee constantly. And he didn't have any problems with insomnia. So it really it has to do with your genetic makeup.
Does it sometimes affect your, like later on, you know, like how people use it heavily from the beginning and then they just stop?
Yeah, well, the reality is that there's 4 of us in this room, and of the 4 of, caffeine doesn't affect me at all.
Yeah, don't.
Yeah, so we have 2 people that it doesn't affect.
I could drink a Monster and still go to sleep.
Yeah,
But there's some in the coffee, the caffeine, that helps
with your migraine headaches.
Yeah.
And I can tell you what that is that helps your migraine headaches. It expands your blood vessels in your brain. That's what a migraine is. It's a shrinking of your blood vessels.
Constriction.
Yeah, constriction, exactly. So, and the caffeine will expand those blood vessels, and that's why it helps you. But at the same time, you may not be sensitive to caffeine, whereas it keeps you awake. It may not do anything else to you except it helps you with your migraines. So everybody is different.
But I drink a lot of coffee in the service.
It doesn't make any difference, but you still sleep.
Sometimes.
Okay, do you have a problem, can you control your sleep pattern by drinking coffee? In other words, if you want to stay awake, can you drink coffee and stay awake? Does it keep you awake? Do you get irritated? Do you get agitated?
Oh, no,
Does it
no,
give you the
no.
shakes?
No.
You're not sensitive to caffeine. You're just not sensitive to caffeine. It's, you know,
I don't know,
there's
my-
there's 2 other of us.
My
that-
mother-in-law has a cup and she's zing. I'm just
Exactly,
like,
she's bouncing off the walls. She's
Yeah,
very
she will.
sensitive to
Oh gosh, I
caffeine.
can't even have a soda.
Exactly. So the point is that despite the fact that you drink caffeine to control your headaches, it doesn't affect your sleep pattern. So when we say coffee here, what we're really talking about caffeine. I mean, some people could drink a Monster and stay up for 48 hours because it would keep them awake. But it's not going to happen with you. Doesn't happen to me. Doesn't happen to Earl's. I don't know, we're not asking you about your caffeine. So what about your caffeine consumption? Does it keep you awake?
Yes.
Okay, so,
But it doesn't give me the jitters or nothing,
Okay.
it just keeps me awake.
but you don't drink enough to give yourself
Yeah.
the jitters, okay. You're smart enough not to drink that much coffee, but if you drank too much, you were trying to stay awake, you would get the shakes. It'd give you the shakes because you're sensitive to it. So out of 4 people in this room, 1 of us is sensitive to caffeine, and the other 3 aren't. It's just the way it works. But I'm glad that it helps your headaches. There you go.
And sometimes I get bad and I'm just like Corey knows, I'm fucking tired. I'm kind of, shh. My daughter, shh. Okay.
Yeah, I saw,
It's gotta be completely dark and I have a pillow on my face. It's pretty bad.
I saw they had a thing on 60 Minutes about the injections you were getting in the back of your head.
Yeah.
That was for PTSD.
I can't say the word,
Yeah.
OCC, nerve block shot.
Exactly.
That's what it was.
Yeah, they were giving GIs shots for PTSD.
The needle was pretty big too. It was right here.
Exactly.
shoulder.
Yeah.
And they sent a alpha stem machine to my house, but they're not working, so I got mad and I threw it and broke it. So it's supposed to be like the things you put on your head.
Well, I congratulate you on curing your problem yourself. They were trying to do it with those injections.
I had it for like 4 months when I came back from my rib.
Yeah. Amazing. What are they gonna come up with next? We're gonna stick a needle in your brain and take away your PTSD. Insomnia. Some insomniacs show less REM sleep and more stage 2 sleep, a less restful state. Situational insomnia can be caused by shift work, by time zone changes, or some novelty like sleeping in a strange bed. It's either too hard or too soft. Or my problem is pillows. I can't find a pillow that fits, you know, I need a soft pillow.
I can sleep on a freaking shoe.
Yeah, well, I've done that too. I didn't want to. These problems may cause sleep onset insomnia, difficulty falling to sleep. Sleep maintenance insomnia is a condition where the individual has a difficulty remaining asleep, so they wake up during the night and they can't go back to sleep. Sleep apnea, this is what my wife has. This is something brand new, so she gets to wear a Batman mask to bed.
Oh, yes.
She ever see that?
She has sleep apnea, yeah. It's a problem for people who form a respiratory obstruction when they sleep. As the night progresses, their oxygen level will drop and the individual is kept from sleeping deeply by a choking feeling. And of course, she didn't know this was happening. She was snoring like I said, she snores like a freight train coming down the track. This is a common problem with people that are obese. My wife is a little bit overweight, but it can happen to anyone who sleeps in a strange position. That was her biggest problem. Because she was having, of course, she had hip problems, she had neck problems because of the Bradley vehicle accident she was in. She couldn't find a comfortable position. So she was, when she fell asleep, she was snoring. She moved around a lot because of her hips. Now that she's had both of her hips replaced and she's had her neck fused.
Does this go the same with people that are diabetic that have a hard time breathing on their own? Okay.
Yeah, I knew someone like that had a CPAP.
Yeah.
It wasn't he was overweight, just he was
Diabetic.
yeah.
Diabetic and their circulation is poor, so
Yeah.
if they get in the wrong position, it puts a portion of their body to sleep.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Okay.
cuts off circulation, because their circulation is so bad. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why a lot of diabetics have to sleep sitting up.
Yeah, I've heard that so many
Yeah.
times before. Yeah.
Not,
That's why I was just wondering, you know, if that's
yeah,
the same
it's
thing.
not a happy situation.
Yeah.
So they can't sleep in a bed unless they're sleeping in one of those beds that have all those.
Like the reclining.
Yeah, the recliners. They usually sleep in the recliners, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, this is comfortable.
Sleeping aids, most modern sleeping pills activate GABA receptors, inhibiting broad regions of the brain, but use of such medications as Halcyon may be a problem. Any sleep aid that you use is a problem. If you're using something to go to sleep, then you got a really serious problem. You shouldn't be taking anything to go to sleep. You need to fall asleep on your own. And if you can't do that, you need to figure out what it is that your problem is and not take any of these Ambien or Halcyon or any of the other sleep aids.
No. Ambien, Lunesta, Trazodone,
Trazodone's an SSRI. They gave that to you so you'd skip over Delta wave. Your Delta wave sleep. Yeah. It's not really-
Trazodone also took that. Seriously,
But you don't use anything now.
Nah.
Okay. And you still fall asleep. Continually use of a sleep-inducing medication may lead to a reduction of its effectiveness and result in increased dosages that may be a health hazard. This is the biggest problem with taking Ambien. If you take Ambien, it's going to work for a month, it's going to work for 2 months maybe, and then all of a sudden it's not working anymore. So they give you a stronger dosage. Now you're taking more Ambien, you feel groggy during the day, you don't really feel very good, it's going to work for a couple more months, and then all of a sudden they're going to have to kick you up. They're going to have to double your dosage. This is the problem with any of these sleep aids. They have to increase. Eventually you get to the point where it doesn't work anymore, and then they have to increase the dosage, and now pretty soon you're getting drugged up pretty good. And this isn't a good idea. This is just not a good idea. They change the pattern of the sleep that lasts even after the cessation of use. The other problem is once you go off these sleep aids, now all of a sudden you have a rebound effect, and it's worse. It's worse than it ever has been. So now you got a really serious problem. a really serious problem, because whereas before you were having problems falling asleep, now you can't sleep because you're on these sleep aids and they're not working anymore. So what you want to do is take stronger and stronger doses of Ambien, but of course, it's just gonna make you worse. So they have to wean you off of this stuff, as
Yeah.
strange as that may seem.
First time they gave me Ambien, it didn't even work.
Ambien didn't work?
No, it didn't work.
Okay.
So first they started me off at 10 milligrams, and they got it up to 20. I'm like, this ain't freaking working,
They
man.
just doubled
And
your
then they put
dose.
me on Lunesta. That worked.
That's-
But they started me out at freaking 20.
Lunesta's a Z drug. It puts an interesting form of neurotransmitter in your brain. And this is something that you have automatically just by looking at darkness and looking at the light. And now all of a sudden we got a really serious problem. Let me get through the rest of this. So it changes the sleep pattern. They tend to reduce REM sleep, which accumulates with continued usage, causing an unpleasant rebound with the cessation, because we're not getting enough REM sleep. The increase in GABA stays with the individual even when they're awake, causing a drowsy state, and this is known as sleep drunkenness. And this is the problem, this is the biggest problem that you have with individuals suffering from or taking Ambien, is the fact that they feel dull all the time. They feel like they've got mush in their head. And it has to do with the increased amount of GABA. Normally, if you did it normally and you stayed up for 48 hours and then you tried to sleep, you would feel the same way, but it would be because of serotonin and potentially dopamine. But that's natural. And the next night, you're gonna be okay because you're gonna go into REM sleep the next night. And it's gonna take care of that whole problem. So the best thing you can do is find something else to put yourself to sleep. Don't use drugs.
No.
After doing your one, you have a choice. You just have to go with it.
Doctors.